Well, housing has become a crucial issue in Australia in recent months and even recent years. It's clear there aren't enough homes to keep up with population demand, and this is something that politicians at all levels are trying to grapple with. Economists are now predicting the housing crisis will worsen as surging migration and falling house construction create a recipe for disaster. Now, a new study has found that younger voters are becoming increasingly frustrated with the government over its attempts to combat the housing shortage. And when I say new study, we're talking about focus groups from Redbridge Group Director Simon Welsh. You report to us every week and you're talking about housing this week, Simon. What are you finding?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. It's really interesting. I would say in the last sort of 3 months or so, just to put a figure on it, that what we've seen is the tone in the conversation around housing. I'm talking now particularly with sort of younger people that are renters, non-homeowners. The tone has changed. It's gone from one of a sense of frustration to really just visceral anger at the moment. It has become a white hot issue. And it's driven by this sort of perception and experience. These folk are acutely aware that it's more difficult for them to get into the housing market than it was for their parents or their grandparents' generation. But even that in itself is not the problem. The problem is that they look at it and they say it's difficult for us to get in because whole systems have evolved to create this kind of imbalance in the market where, if you're not already a homeowner, it's just nigh on impossible to get in. We've seen reports in the media recently about young people sort of giving up on the dream and focusing on lifestyle. Absolutely. We see that in our focus groups. Young people are saying, well, there's no way I'm going to own. One day down the track, maybe, God forbid, when mum and dad pass on, I might inherit the home and those sorts of things, but there's no way I'm ever going to be able to buy myself. So why not focus on lifestyle? So there's this real fault line running through sort of the Australian electorate, through the Australian society around housing and home ownership right now. But as I say, the core of the anger is this system that they see as being created by politicians who they often point out to us in focus groups have this vested interest, because many of them are multiple property owners themselves, to create this system of incentives around sort of multiple property ownership and sort of negative gearing, I suppose, is one of sort of the iconic policies that they point to repeatedly in these focus groups to sort of show how the system's kind of stacked against those that are trying to enter the market.
Yeah, right. So what kind of seats are you doing these focus groups in? Are they Labor Green seats? Are they swing seats? And who are they directing their anger towards? Is it the current government? Is it the previous one? Is it council? Is it state? Who is it?
Yeah, the politics of this are really interesting. So particularly in the inner city, so particularly in those Labor Greens contest seats, it's really interesting. So definitely there's sort of plenty of anger to go around. So no one sort of gets away with it here. And even the Greens, I know the Greens are sort of moving into this space, but they haven't quite nailed it yet. And one of the reasons they haven't nailed it is the groups will often tell us that this is not just about a demand side issue, it's also a supply side issue. So younger sort of millennial renting cohorts are quite pro density. So they don't mind the idea of increasing density in the areas where they're already living. Why wouldn't you? I want to live where I live because that's where my lifestyle is, that's where my job is, that's where my friends is. I don't want to have to move away. So they're quite pro density. So even the Greens are sort of seen as part of the problem in here, because they've got this reputation at the local government level of sort of a bit of NIMBYism and those sorts of things. So that sort of attaches to their brand, so they don't get away scot-free. But certainly the major parties are the major villains here. And I think if the Greens can get their policy settings right, get that consistency from the federal down to the local government, and get their messaging right around this, it really it's a kind of issue. The anger is such that you really could see housing do to Labor what climate did to the Liberals with many of these young voter cohorts.
Wow.
I can't emphasise enough just how powerful it is.
So, right, the Achilles heel for Labor could be this housing issue if they don't fix it. Wow, that's massive. And Simon, I guess, I don't know whether you pick this up in your groups, but once you cross the Rubicon from renter to homeowner, I imagine your attitude changes pretty quickly.
It doesn't. It doesn't. Even home. So because of this cost of living crisis that we're going through now and the inflation, even homeowners, particularly young homeowners, don't feel real secure in their asset ownership right now. So that they're also feeling a lot of these insecurities. This perception that I've had to borrow big, I've had to pay big because of these same systems that have operated, that have sort of forced me into this situation where I'm now extremely financially vulnerable. So I feel like I've been sort of forced into this situation. So it's not an instant, immediate kind of transition in that space, particularly because of the financial stresses that we've got at the moment. And even older homeowners are now really, really worried about their kids. So, a year ago, 2 years ago, pre-COVID, you'd sort of get, you get this passing mention about, I hope my kids one day will be able to afford, but gee, it's tough. But there was this sense of bank of mum and dad, we'll be able to help them out. It'll be okay. With this tightening financial situation, that bank of mum and dad is now looking at that and going, gee, I feel like I've sort of made promises to my kids and I'm not going to be able to deliver. So they're now, there's sort of a guilt attached to that, and they're now really worried about their children being able to afford a home, be able to settle down and have family, raise kids. Like, it gets down to fundamental things like, the capacity and the willingness to have children. When people are making those sorts of compromises in your life, something big and deep is going on.
Absolutely fascinating as well. I think you're right. This could be a real problem this term, and it's the incumbents, it's the government that's got this problem lumped on their shoulders. Simon, thanks so much.
Thanks, Laura.